Ah, yes, South Korea, the land of magnificent accomplishments such as mukbang K-pop K-dramas and home to multi-billion-dollar companies such as LG, Samsung, Hyundai, Kia, and BTS. In 2022, South Korea boasted the title for the fourth largest economy in Asia, placing them at number 13th on the global ranking. The Korea that we're all familiar with is one that is technologically advanced, democratically free, and filled with capitalistic opportunities. Sort of. But what if I told you that merely 70 years ago, South Korea looked more like this? 67% of the nation living in poverty, electricity only available for a few hours a day, a country destroyed by a recent civil war. Life in the early days of the Korean Republic can best be described as a war-torn nightmare, an absolute clusterfuck. South Korea's GDP in 1953, 47.7 billion. South Korean won. That's about $40 million. A mere fraction of the $2 trillion today. So then, you're probably wondering, just how exactly did South Korea get to where it is today? Although there is no single answer to this question, there is a man in Korean history that is seldom talked about outside of Korea. The man who is largely accredited with rapid economic growth and modernization of South Korea, paving the way and foundation for the mukbang, K-pop, K-drama, and corporate Korea that we know and love today. A controversial figure in South Korean history, his reign was also filled with corruption and democratic suppression, and his economic policies would have unintended consequences in the future of the nation. His name? Chung Hee. Our tale begins in the land of Imperial Japanese-occupied Korea. In 1910, a full 29 years before the Second World War, the Empire of Japan officially annexed Korea, a period in which the Japanese Empire occupied the country and would take active measures to distribute Korean land for themselves, rewrite Korea's history by burning ancient records, and suppress the freedom of speech. Korean children were also prohibited to speak their native language in schools, given Japanese names, and studying Korean text was forbidden unless approved by the Japanese government. Hundreds of thousands of Korean women were also systematically trafficked and sold to be used as slaves in the Imperial Japanese Army. I certainly hope this doesn't cause lasting tensions for the next 100 years. It would be during this turbulent time Chung Hee would be brought into the world. Chung Hee was born to his parents Park Sung-bin and Baek Nam-ui on the 14th of November, 1917. The youngest of 6 children, he grew up in a poor household on the countryside of Korea, in a small village called Sangmo, located in the North Gyeongsang province. In fact, they were so poor that Chung Hee's mother, in fear of having to fall into even deeper poverty by having another child, sought to get rid of Chung Hee while he was still in the womb by drinking an entire bowl of hot soy sauce and even throwing herself off a mountain in hopes that she would miscarry. Fortunately, her attempts would be in vain, as she would give birth to a small but healthy boy. Those around Chung Hee described him to harbor resentment for growing up in a poor household. He long held ambitions to escape the countryside, in hopes of something bigger. His greatness, however, wouldn't be achieved through academics. He was reportedly a mediocre student, graduating 51st place out of 100 students. His grades progressively worsened, and it seemed Chung Hee had lost interest in schooling. But what he lacked in academics he made up for in ambition, dedication, and nationalism. He reportedly walked 10 miles to his school for 6 years and was rarely ever late. It is also said that he grew up idolizing the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte, Lee Sun-shin, and despite the oppressive ruling of the Koreans by the Japanese, Chung Hee held great admiration for the Japanese military and their achievements in modernization and the Bushido code of the samurai. However, despite his admiration for the Japanese army, he never lost sight of his nationalistic pride as a Korean. A series of poems that he wrote indicates that he was keenly aware of the colonial situation of his country, while simultaneously showing his sense of nationalism. I'll read one of the poems for you right now. Mount Kumgang, 12,000 peaks. The world's most famous mountain. Ah, your features are so splendid and solemn, and you spread your fame all over the world. But we, who live in the same land, Korea, are so destitute that we are ashamed to lift our heads to look at you. Mount Kumgang, we too will exert ourselves to shine out to the world alongside you. By the way, he was 17. Upon graduating high school, he managed to secure a series of teaching jobs, but it seemed that Park Chung Hee showed little interest in teaching. The other teachers at the school said Park Chung Hee seemed disinterested, moody, and discontent. It would also be around this time he would marry his first wife, Kim Ho-nam, whom he would have his first daughter with. Presumably due to the marriage being arranged, it was reported that he and his wife didn't exactly seem to get along. Park Chung Hee had what essentially equated to a quarter-life crisis. He didn't feel fulfilled in his work, and he felt stuck in a marriage that he didn't want. He decided it was time for a change. Only after 3 years, he would resign from his teaching job to enlist in the Manchukuo Military Academy. It was said that in order to get a better chance of being accepted into the academy, Park Chung Hee cut his finger to write a message on the exam paper in blood. The message roughly translating to, he would do his best to serve the country loyally and die for the benefit of the public. The Japanese admissions office at the time was like, oh, this guy's crazy. We can't let him into the Imperial Army, right? But
isn't this exactly what the Japanese army needs?
Oh my god. The plan ended up working, and not only was he accepted into the academy, the letter was subsequently published in the Manchu Times newspaper. Unlike in high school, Park Chung Hee thrived in the military academy, even graduating in the top of his class. The Japanese instructors at the academy were so impressed by his abilities that he was even recommended to attend the Japanese Military Academy near Tokyo. One of the mere handful of Koreans in the academy, and nearly unheard of at the time. Upon graduating, he was stationed in Manchuria, where he would be able to shine even brighter than he ever had before, in the field of glorious combat. The year is now 1944, April. In Manchuria, Park Chung Hee made brave account of himself, joining the fight against the Chinese Revolutionary Army, throwing himself into the enemy's fire. It was said that he once charged the front lines with grenades strapped in both hands while riding the Japanese warhorse straight on into the... Nah, I'm just with you. In actuality, accounts from his peers describe the time spent in the army as relatively easy, with plenty of time to drink and hang out with little to no combat experience. So take his experience in Manchuria with a grain of salt, I guess. Fast forward to 1945. Japan had been in a little-known conflict called World War II. The Japanese simultaneously had been fighting China, Great Britain, and the United States for the past 4 years. And it was not going well for them. And, well, we all know what happened in August. Then, to make matters worse, just 2 days after the atomic explosion on Hiroshima, the Soviet Union declared war on the Empire of Japan. Then the very next day, this happened. To the shock of everyone, they were eventually alerted to the news that Japan had surrendered. Park Chung Hee and his men were later disarmed by the Chinese army and left without command to report to. Park Chung Hee and a group of men wandered around China, making their way to Beijing. He would board an American ship making his way to Busan, back to Korea. Upon returning to Korea, Park Chung-hee enrolled in the Joseon Defense Military School, where he would graduate as a second lieutenant. The year is now 1946. Koreans liberated, free from the clutches of Imperial Japan. It's an amazing time to be not at all, actually. After the Japanese surrender following World War II, Korea was divided into two. The North was occupied by the Soviets and the South by the Americans. More specifically, the southern half of Korea would be run by the United States Army Military Government in Korea, or USAMGIC for short. USAMGIC? And under their rule, the country was nothing short of pandemonium. Failed rationing of rice leading to mass starvation, sickness running rampant with no medicine to cure the sick, and keeping Japanese governors on as advisors to help run the country. It was also during this time a group of South Koreans would start to organize behind a certain philosophy. A philosophy where everyone was equal and there would be no oppressive power to govern the citizens. The citizens governed themselves. That's right, the C word. Communism. With the government in disarray, and after years of Japanese imperialism, the peasants and citizens of Korea flocked to communism. To the citizens of Korea, communism seemed like a system too good to be true. And in September of 1946, a mere year after the liberation from Japan, over 250,000 people took to the streets to strike in the city of Busan in the name of communism. This strike in Busan would later escalate to other parts of the country, eventually snowballing into what is now called the Autumn Uprising of 1946, or the Daegu Tenwon Incident in Korean. The uprising was brutally suppressed by Korean and American forces, resulting in over 600 people killed and thousands injured, with 2,500 being arrested. Among the casualties was Park Chung-hee's older brother, Park Sang-hee. It was becoming clear to Park Chung-hee, as well as the citizens of Korea, that the American occupiers didn't really seem to care all that much about the interests of the people. Enraged by the death of his brother and by the influence of his brother's friend, Park Chung-hee would even later join the, definitely not communist, Korean Labor Party. Seeing their government massacring their own people, it is said that many in the South Korean army during this time turned to the communist cause. Here, Park Chung-hee would play a pivotal part in the party, even being a leading figure in attempting to infiltrate the National Guard with the goal of eventually overthrowing the government. Soon, the First Republic of Korea would be democratically elected in the South. Many of the citizens in South Korea rejected the election, refusing to take part until the country was unified. Further protests broke out in the name of communism, unification, and Korean independence. This period would see a dark time in Korean history where communist uprisings would be brutally suppressed, with deaths in the tens of thousands. The Jeju Uprising in April 1948, 14,000 killed, with some estimates as high as 80,000. October 1948, the Yeosu Suncheon Rebellion, 3,000 killed, with estimates nearing 12,000. In an attempt to quell the chaos and the uprisings, the central government of the First Republic of Korea would arrest suspected communists, putting them to trial. Many would be executed, many of whom were completely innocent. The Red Scare had taken over South Korea like a wildfire. Amidst the communism purge in South Korea, Park Chung-hee's name would come up in connection to the aforementioned Yeosu Rebellion. He would later be arrested and would face execution for treason. His mother, upon hearing the news of his imprisonment, after only just recently losing another one of her children, would pass away from the shock. It seemed as if Park Chung-hee's life was crumbling all around him, all at once. However, fate would have other plans. A government official, impressed with his potential and his background, hired him in the Military Combat Information Division of the Army. It seemed that Park Chung-hee was spared. However, in the condition that his life was spared, Park Chung Hee would be stripped of his military titles and was never permitted to join the army again. All of the work he had done as an army officer had been crushed. Simultaneously, while all of this was happening, something loomed in the distance of the Korean Republic's future. A report would later be published from the Military Combat Information Division stating that the North Korean army would invade the South in just 6 months' time.